Welcome to chapter 71 of Strength Culture Presents Quantum Lifting Podcast. And back by popular demand, we did have a few people ask for your return, which these podcasts will be going. We will be keeping them going, but Dr. Peter Coleman, we had a fair few people. We hadn't done one for a while, probably since a couple of months now. I had a few people ask about you returning, so I thought it would be fitting to have you on again. And I know you had a topic that you wanted to talk about, which was chasing happiness, or happiness is a dumb goal.
It is a dumb goal. Yeah.
So I know you're very passionate about this. I had to squeeze through a couple of those articles that you sent me. Very similar. We have spoken about this book on the podcast before, but The Other Side of Happiness, the Brock Bastian book, which is a really good book to read on this topic if you are interested in looking into it a bit deeper, which obviously was recommended by you to me, and I read that. That's a while ago, nearly a year ago I read that book.
That would be nearly a year, yeah.
So we have discussed that before, but I know you're very, very passionate about this topic.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me back on. I always love to get back on the podcast with you guys. So thank you. And I thought it was an interesting topic. Like you and I have been discussing sort of the emotional strain a lot of people have been experiencing during lockdown, and particularly the second lockdown, I think came as a real blow for a lot of people. And talking about like the emotions that come up and the experiences that have been happening. And I think it's an important topic to talk about our concepts of happiness that tend to be very dominant in our society, and how they can actually, ironically, serve in quite a destructive way to actually make us less happy, which is a sort of interesting paradox. But first of all, Charlie, I mean, how have you been experiencing this, particularly the second lockdown?
Yeah, second lockdown was a little bit rough, to say the least, just purely because of, having the gym open again for 2.5 weeks. I was actually like a little bit anxious about the gym reopening because I sort of acclimated to the first lockdown and was enjoying it. But once it did open and everything got in the swing of things, I was really enjoying it. It was kind of a reminder to feel what it's like to have social interactions and have a gym that has an environment and a bit of an atmosphere to it. So I really, really had started to enjoy it and get into a good rhythm, and I was feeling good. And we started producing some YouTube content with Donnie, upping our YouTube game, which had been really, really interesting. We're excited to see where that goes. And all of a sudden, just bang, 2.5 weeks in, we're shut again. And for the first few days, I was okay. I was kind of like, whatever, I don't think it really hit me. And then it hit me on the following Monday when I was meant to be, back at work, or, Monday routine. I was just feeling really down, really flat, and a bit defeated because I feel like there was no end to this. And obviously, we probably do have a few listeners that are listening from other states. And if you are living your normal life, we really, we wish you all the best, because I know some of my clients from Perth and New South Wales and stuff are training in normal gyms. They're living their normal life, which is awesome, and I'm very, very happy for them. But obviously this is a little bit more directed to, the Victorian listeners that are in the same boat as us. And obviously, with that came a big dip in motivation. I felt very just flat, not really motivated. So I gave myself probably a week and a half of just doing the bare minimum, making sure clients are up to date and that they were looked after. But in terms of other stuff, I just was not interested. Not that I didn't care. It was just like, I was meant to be on a holiday now. I was like, I was just going to have sort of a bit of a break myself mentally. So that was really good. Now I'm feeling a little bit more back into the swing of things, and sort of just I'm trying to enjoy it as much as possible, because I did see an email from another gym that I'm on their emailing list, that they said they had like 25 things to embrace with the lockdown, and I thought it was a really cool list. One of them was enjoy the parts of lockdown or there'll be parts of lockdown that you enjoy. So, try and enjoy those things because one day they'll be gone. And there are certain things that I am enjoying. So I'm trying to embrace those aspects of it to help me along in this period. But there's definitely a reoccurring theme with my clients that I've noticed, that all of them feel a big dip in motivation. They're not as driven to train and stuff. So I think, a big message I've been trying to get out to a lot of people is just that's okay. Because I feel like everyone's going through that. And to try and use their training as an outlet or as an escape, and rather than something that is a pressure or a weight upon them.
Yeah.
Someone's just calling and it's attached to my headphones. Sorry.
Well, I think what you're talking about is... Are you good?
Yeah, wait, we're just having some technical difficulties. Someone just called me and it was attached to my headphones, so it
no worries.
It went through my headphones. But yeah, to embrace, and that it is okay not to feel super motivated right now. I don't think many people are, and to really just enjoy the things that you like doing. So for me, one of them is I've been riding my bike, cycling with Buzz, and that's been really nice. Something I haven't done much of recently, and yeah, it's really nice to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what you're talking about really, and I think that's, the way you're framing it for people is like, don't worry if you're feeling demotivated, is absolutely correct, really, because I think, and where this comes to this whole happiness is a dumb goal kind of thing. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot more recently is, we tend to, as a society, and where the coronavirus has really thrown us off course in a massive way, is that we tend to have this focus of this very future-orientated focus of constant progress, constant focusing on this goal of trying to reach this state where of sort of self-improvement and fulfillment of various goals and things like that, with particularly the goal to be happy, right? So that's a goal that we often put forward. Like, parents want what do you want for your child? I just want them to be happy. That's very common in the American Constitution. It's actually written into the, not the Declaration of Independence, the pursuit of happiness. Now, the weird thing is, and again, what books like The Other Side of Happiness and more psychological research is showing, is that actually that focus on happiness as a goal is actually making us less happy. Now, not to say that wanting to be happy in itself is bad, but when we make it the primary goal of our existence, it means that when we're not happy, when we experience emotions that aren't happiness, we think there's something wrong. And this has kind of been a byproduct of the positive psychology movement, which has been basically like, when psychology first started, there was the idea that, if you weren't functional, you check your car, you're the car, you got to check it into the shop to get fixed, and then you get back on the road, right? But it's almost become this thing that you're constantly needing to check your car in, pimp your ride, make it better and better and better all the time. And the sort of the negative of that, which, in a lot of ways has, isn't a bad idea in itself, that you would constantly want to work on yourself and, maximize your life, as it were. But what the flip side of that is that there's a constant sense of dissatisfaction or worthlessness that comes with the reality that humans aren't always happy all the time. And we actually can't be. It's actually not even, I don't think it's even physiologically possible to be happy all the time. So
the moment that you are happy forever, then happiness is no longer, it's just baseline.
Yeah. Well, and indeed, like, the research has shown things like, as you talk about baseline, like the hedonic treadmill, the hedonic return, that you might go through, which is basically the idea that people who go through major life events, like they win the lottery, for example, or they lose a leg, they tend to, you know, whether it's a positive or negative experience, the tendency is to reset to baseline after a period of time. So you might get all the things you've ever dreamed of. You might, you know, your business might boom, you might become super rich, you might get the ideal partner, you might get tick all the boxes, you know, that you've got. You will most likely reset to the level of happiness you were at prior to all those events. And equally negative events, like you get hit by a bus, you lose a leg, you lose a partner, you're actually over time likely to again reset back to baseline again. So as a goal in and of itself, it's not a terribly meaningful goal. And I think that's the big issue, is that we get stuck on this treadmill, and particularly that gets co-opted a lot by consumerism and so forth, that, you know, if you buy the right things, if you have the right amount of money, if you et cetera, then you'll reach this state of happiness. And then of course that doesn't happen, which then feeds the need to acquire more, because it won't stop. So they're finding more and more with happiness that we need to move away from that as a goal in and of itself, and to focus instead on goals that are much more meaningful to us. And again, those goals can be very much, rather than about emotional states, can be a lot more like, am I living a life I'm proud of? Am I living in integrity? Am I being kind? Am I being generous? Have I, you know, I can work on this project. I can do something that benefits others. You know, that we shift our mindset away from our emotional states, because what it tends to make us do is reject the quote unquote negative emotions when they come up. So we think when we're disappointed or sad in lockdown that there's something horribly wrong with us. And that's not true. It would actually be surprising if people weren't upset, disappointed, experience anxiety during a time of global pandemic with international uncertainty. Like it wouldn't be terribly, you know, functional to not have some of those emotional experiences, because they're just part of the human experience. Yeah, which feeds very much into what you were saying before about your clients being disappointed or not disappointed, but disengaged or demotivated. That it's to a degree unsurprising. And, you know, that's where having compassion and understanding for that state of mind is so important, because of course people are feeling that way, like naturally. And that's where I sent you that article that I think we've mentioned on a previous podcast, about how they studied, I think it was Chinese culture versus I think American. And they basically found that people didn't experience less quote unquote negative emotions in those cultures, but what they tended to do is be more adaptive with it. So it would tend to not become pathological. It wouldn't disable them from living their lives. If they were feeling, you know, frightened or unhappy or sad, they would tend to just keep living their lives. And they looked into why, and it was all to do with the way they saw the emotions. So we tend to, in our culture, see things very much in terms of absolutes, like you're either happy or you're sad, you're very much like one or the other, where they'd see it more as yin and yang, that you have a sort of a range of emotional colors going on at any one time, and you're not just one thing. And also, they tend to, whereas in the Western culture, we tend to project into the future. However we're feeling now, we expect to always feel that way. We tend to project a future where we will continue to feel that way. So if we're happy, we just expect constantly more happiness. And if we're unhappy, we expect more unhappiness. Whereas in Chinese culture, they tend to see it more as changing, so that you will be, if you're happy one day, you'll be sad the next. And then the other thing they tend to do is they tend to see their emotional states in a wider context. So they wouldn't have trouble understanding that I'm feeling this way, and that's part of this whole situation. You know, it's response, it's natural, it's just this outcome of what's going on around me. We tend to see things very much like, if I'm feeling shit, that's sort of like this maladaptive response to things and I need to fix it, versus I just feel crappy, that's okay.
Yeah. So it's the way that they view their emotional states completely changes their experience. It's also, I think the thing too with that whole happiness thing is that there are going to be things that occur in your life that ultimately make you unhappy. There'll be deaths, there'll be, you get fired from your job, you get stuck in a pandemic. So it's unrealistic to sit here and think that my goal should be to always be happy. But the other side of it is that the relative emotional states you experience allow for other things to blossom. So if you are sad, it means that in days to come or weeks to come, there will be probably a moment of pure bliss and happiness, because relatively speaking, you felt a bit down for a couple of weeks and now you felt up. So like that's how I look at it anyway. But my emotional states of how I view it has changed quite a lot, and not try and get trapped in the story that you tell yourself. Because I find I do that where I just repeat. I think, as you said, the person before that, they feel down or sad and they feel like they're going to feel like that for, the rest of their life. I used to do that, and I've tried to, and that's a story that I tell myself, and I try and not do that anymore, because there's going to be moments of pure excitement, joy, and blissfulness. They're going to happen again. They will, like, they're out there and they will happen, and there'll also be moments where we feel down and flat and defeated. So I guess the way you look at those is the important thing.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's why I'm saying sort of happiness is in itself a dumb goal, right? Because the focus, as Brock Bastin explains in The Other Side of Happiness, the desire or the focus on being happy makes us less happy. And a part of that has to do with the fact that we then see ourselves as not being happy as dysfunctional, as like there's something wrong with us. And that's actually, and then we're constantly anxious about being happy, which when we're not happy, which actually just puts us in a worse state of mind. Whereas if our goals are more orientated towards living a meaningful life, or doing things that we find meaningful, or doing things that we find purposeful, or doing things that we find kind or generous or of benefit to yourself and others, then that's a much more meaningful way of framing your experience. So you might not be happy all the time, but you can live your life in a way where you feel purposeful and meaningful about what you're doing, which is different. But that actually is shown to generate a greater sense of well-being if we focus instead on, well, I'm just going to keep trucking. I'm just going to keep doing the things I do because I believe in what I'm doing. And I may not always feel great, which is fine. Like that, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, for me, the thing that I think's really massively helped me during lockdown, because I've actually, for myself, I'm not loving that people getting sick and that there's all this chaos and businesses are, going under and things like that. I definitely don't love that. But for me, in my own personal experience, I actually have tended to enjoy lockdown for myself. And that's because of a big factor of that is I'm writing a book. And I find working on my book a very meaningful activity for me. So it's something I find, it's creative pursuit. I find it very interesting. I feel very engaged by it. And I feel very purposeful around it. And so that's sort of given me a sense of sort of undercurrent of purpose during lockdown that has been really helpful in the way I've sort of thought about it.
Yeah, so having that sense of purpose helps quite a lot.
Yeah.
And it was so I started when we were in the gym. I started cutting. I went into a 4-week little mini cut to try and drop some weight, and I actually found that was the first week. The first week of that was the last week of the gym being open, and I actually found that doing that gave me a different goal to focus on. That wasn't training, it wasn't my guitar, it wasn't work related stuff. It was just, I haven't cut for a while, cut some weight. And it gave me a sense of purpose, and actually made the first couple of weeks, there was something to focus on. So I was making sure I was getting out and getting my steps. And I found a really big sense of well-being from that, which I thought was really cool. But I just thought that something that I've been doing with my guitar is that I've been putting pressure on myself to make sure I play every day. Oh, you didn't play today. Like, why didn't you play? Should we practice? And I've actually dropped that pressure. And since I've dropped that pressure, I've been picking up the guitar more and just playing more and practicing more because I'm not pressuring myself to play. And you can kind of use that as an analogy for the happiness is a dumb goal. When we focus on happiness as the goal and we're not quite getting there, we always just look at ourselves as an underachiever or a failure.
Yeah.
And that's how I kind of felt with the guitar. Using the guitar as happiness. Like, I have to practice every day. I have to learn new songs. If I don't learn new songs, I'm failing at guitar. I dropped that, and I've been inadvertently playing more guitar because of that. And I find that quite interesting.
And I mean, that's where this whole kind of tick box approach to living undoes us in a lot of ways, because exactly what you're talking about. Like, if we focus on if we're putting this enormous pressure on ourselves, that will often prove counterproductive at a point. You know, if it becomes this huge burden of stress or pressure, then we start to react negatively against it, and we just shut down from it. And that's a sort of natural, what goes up must go down kind of law of nature. You know, the greater the application of stress and pressure, the more likely you are to want to retreat away as a way of dealing with that. But also equally, this whole sort of, the other thing I think that lockdown's really done is it's really screwed with our whole attitude of, we've become very concerned because a lot of the things we associate with happiness, such as financial goals or material goals or career goals or things like that, have actually been sort of thrown upside down for people. Like, so, you know, we tend to believe that sort of the modern day late capitalist neoliberal myth is that we can all kind of achieve this state of career success and wealth and et cetera, and that if we don't do that, there's something terribly wrong. You know, like, we've failed at being a person, basically. And what's happened, though, is that there's these massive external events happened, and people are literally unable to push forward with their goals in that respect. And again, I'm not actually poo-pooing the goals. I'm not saying those goals in themselves are bad at all. But if we pin our whole sense of self-worth or what we, our whole sense of meaning of life on these external things coming to fruition, we're screwed because they may not happen. And this has been a really powerful reminder that things can come that are completely outside your control and throw things upside down. So this is where, you know, I just finished reading another book about Stoicism. And, you know, for them, they talk about eudaimonia, which is this sort of flourishing of well-being and this experience of sort of peace and sort of tranquility that arises, but they say it should not be a goal in and of itself. It is a natural outcome, the only important thing in life as far as they were concerned, which was living virtuously. So from their point of view, acting with kindness, justice, patience, you know, wisdom, all those things was the only meaningful thing really in life, and the only thing that was always under your control. Like, you can't control whether a global pandemic breaks down or whether, you know, your career goes the way. It's not entirely in your control, but you can control how you're showing up in life, and how you're treating others, how you're being, how you're living in a virtuous way, they would say.
Yeah, you can control what what you are doing personally, but not the external
Yes.
circumstances. And that was something I found that helped me in the first lockdown was the 4 agreements was the always do your best.
Yes.
And I found whenever I was doing something, if I was just doing my best at it in that moment, I felt a big sense of fulfillment. And I did feel a kind of happy state, but not the intention of trying to achieve that state. It was a byproduct of me just trying to do my best. And that's something that I've personally worked on, is not sort of fitting into what society thinks we should be like. And I know like there's this big culture at the moment, or getting up early and getting on the grind early. And for me, that doesn't work for me. I sleep a lot. And I've realized I'm like, that's okay. When I am up though, and I'm sitting down to work for a couple hours, make sure that I sit down for 2 hours and do work. Because I used to be a very chronic procrastinator. I just used to take an hour of work and spread it out across the whole day. Instead, now I've gone, well, I'm sitting down for an hour and I'm going to get it all as much done as I can. So I guess what I'm trying to say with this point is not to fit into what other people think you should be doing, and sort of find what works well for you. And when you do that, you probably are going to find a bit more of a peaceful and happy state when you're living in accordance with what is important for you, which is exactly what you said about living with, your virtues, as the Stoics said. So I think that's a really interesting thing to try this second lockdown if you are Victorian, even if you're not in Victoria, because I know that New South Wales are sort of tinkering on potentially a second lockdown too, but we don't know what's going to happen. So, yeah.
Well, this is actually the other thing that the Stoic, one of the Stoic sayings, which I think we kind of need to bring back, particularly in the wake of the pandemic, which is they'll always put a caveat on any goals they set, which is fate permitting. So they always were living in acknowledgement that fate may come along and mean that what you're aiming for doesn't happen. And they actually, rather than, it's a really interesting turn on the head of like positive visualization, they actually encourage negative visualization. And so what they would do is they would encourage people to contemplate basically the most terrible thing that could possibly happen to you happening. Because then they would meditate on that, and it would take the fear away from it. Because they would contemplate, well, this may happen. This could happen to me. And rather than say turning away from it or shutting it down, you contemplate it, because then you're basically opening yourself up to it and realizing, well, that wouldn't, for the Stoics, and I mean, it's very extreme, right? Like visualizing your partner or your parents or your child dying is a horrible thing to think about. So, it's pretty full on. But what they're meaning by that is that rather than going, well, I just have to always project a positive fate for myself, they'll go, well, that may not happen. So you change the way you think about it so that you open yourself up to realizing greater resilience and greater acceptance of whatever may happen in your life, good and bad, because it's fate permitting. And I think, again, that to me is the huge lesson of the lockdown. Like you don't have this level of control over things that we often believe we do. And particularly people in, say, sort of third world countries and so forth are a lot more familiar with that than we are. We tend to, because of our level of affluence, we tend to believe that we can get whatever we want. And other people in the world are more used to not doing that.
Yeah, they've lived a life full of oppression and being held down and not having the freedom and the ability to do the things that we've done in Australia. And, in one way that's a really good, it's a really great thing for us. We should be very grateful to live in such a good country. But obviously a thing like this that we're going through at the moment has really, exposed us to the conditions that potentially other people may be living in the world where they don't have that much choice, and they are like, because there has been times for me personally where I feel like, yeah, you're a victim. You play the victim mindset, which I think is normal, but you've got to sort of come back to what can I do in this situation.
And also how, that exactly right. Like, and again, if you're focusing on living a virtuous life, if you're focusing on living a good life in terms of how you're showing up, how you're treating others, how you're behaving in the world, you're not a victim. You're never a victim. It's acquiescing and understanding, well, this is my life. This is fate as it is right now. So how do I respond to that? Rather than, all the stress and pressure that comes from living in denial. Again, that's a Byron Katie quote: when you fight reality, you lose 100% of the time. So and that's not to say take a passive role, don't do anything, but what it's saying is, in the moment, what is. You can't change what is in that moment. What is the situation you're in right now is what it is. And again, the Stoics talked about that in terms of indifference. So they'd say that all the external events are basically indifferent. They're not good or bad, they're indifferent. Now, you can have preferred indifference. So they tend to say you can prefer to be wealthy over poor. You can prefer to be happy over unhappy, healthy over sick, all those things. But if whatever happens is ultimately indifferent, and it's how you respond to it, that is what really counts. So I think that's just a really interesting thing, because, a lot of people be living in a lot of denial at the moment, going, this isn't the way it was supposed to be. And of course it is the way it was supposed to be, because that is the way it is in this moment. And it doesn't stop you working to change things. Like, that doesn't make you a victim of it. Like, you can, fight for what you see is right and take actions to positively change your circumstances or the circumstances of other people. But in the moment, the way things are the way things are, and they can't be a different way. And any resistance to that is going to just cause greater suffering.
100%. I want to bring up quickly, because I think I found them quite funny. The Karens going.
Oh yeah.
So, when the face mask rule was brought in, I was like, I was just like, I don't want to wear a face mask. Like, this is bullshit. Like, a bit of a child tantrum. But anyway, it is what it is, as you said. And the first day that the face mask, you just wear it because everyone else is wearing it. I'm also a person that doesn't really like to attract attention, so I'm like, I'll just put this damn thing on. So I just look like normal. However, I've really seen that, so the Karen walking into Bunnings and, telling everyone, I have a choice to wear a face mask. Just, it kind of makes me cringe. And to think that I sort of reacted like that initially, I was like, they can't tell me what to do. But ultimately, I still just did, I had my little tantrum, and then I still just did what, everyone else is doing, and trying to just do my part to help what I can in this situation. But I found it really like that real privilege of like, I don't have to wear it. You can't tell me what to do under, like, this isn't law. You're just and I find it hilarious, but also very cringeworthy at the same time, because I'm like, just put the face mask on. Like, I don't want to wear the face mask, but we just have to.
Well, I mean, what the Karen thing made me think was that the bigger issue was her determination to fight reality was actually making her less kind, was the big thing. Yes. I found. The stress of her was meaning she was a lot more on the attack. She was trying to attack other people. There's these people working at Bunnings who are probably having a really crappy day anyway.
The Bunnings workers, I felt so sorry for, because
I know,
Bunnings workers, and they were being so nice, and I was just like, they're not police, like,
No.
They're just Bunnings workers.
They're not, and I mean, she could have taken them something, like instead. Do you know what I mean? She could have given them a gift, or she could have just been kind to them and made their day better. Like that's a more, in my opinion, more meaningful way to interact. But I mean, the problem is, and I'm not above this myself at all. Like I when I resist reality, when I want other people to be the way I want them to be versus the way they are, and when I want the world to be different from what it is in the moment, and I'm fighting the way it is rather than trying to work with it to change, create positive change, I am less kind. And I mean, that, what you were saying, you were throwing this sort of tantrum in the beginning where you're like, I don't want to do that, blah. And then, you actually find when you're not fighting the way things are, but trying to work with them in a positive way, that's a lot more meaningful. And then you're going to be a lot kinder. You're going to be a lot more gracious. You're going to have less stress. You're going to, you're not going to attack others in the way. And I mean, it's the same with like looking at the political situation, everyone's got an opinion and so forth, but it's just creating this greater divide really, because it's this whole, and I think, again, we've talked about this in the past, that whole cancel culture problem is, in my opinion, a lot of the time as a more progressive person, I think everyone should be able to live the way they want to live. I think, people should be able to let their freak flag fly. I'm usually aligned with progressive social thinking anyway, but I don't agree with the strategy, because I think when you're just calling other people names and shutting them down and not listening and not engaging and all that other stuff, it's not effective. It's creating more war, more drama, more pain, versus going, that's really interesting you think that. I'd really like to have a conversation with you about it. I'd really like to hear your point of view. And I actually think that's a much bigger way. It seems slower, but I think it's a much more effective way of creating change in the world than attacking and resisting.
Unity. It's unity.
It's indifference, letting people have different opinions and letting that be okay. And I mean, I'm as guilty of that as anybody. Sometimes I don't tend to cancel things, but if I hear a point of view that I think is stupid, I can sometimes get my back up about it. And will handle things less skillfully when I do that, versus going, well, that's interesting, let's talk about it. That's an interesting point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. I think we are heading to about 40-minute mark now.
Yeah.
So we like to keep these at about the 30, 35-ish minute mark. But I'm also concerned because I think Zoom stops recording at 45, I believe.
That's okay.
I don't want it to stop as you drink out of your rainbow mug. But I think just to sum up, obviously the topic is obviously you don't want to chase happiness as the goal, but rather live with and act upon your values and your virtues, and happiness should come as a byproduct of doing that. And the goal should be living with your virtues and your values.
Yeah. And also the other one, and a quote from the poet Rainer Maria Rilke: let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. Perfect.
Well, I think that was a very fitting way to sum up the episode. But it's been a pleasure to have you on again. Obviously, we will have you again as a cameo every so often. But if any listeners do have any topics that they wish Pete to talk about or anything, feel free to message email us or DM the Instagram page, or leave a comment on the YouTube video here. But thank you, and as always, happy lifting.
You're so welcome. Yeah, absolutely.